In the grand marble halls of Valdonia Palace, where whispered secrets could topple kingdoms and a single act of defiance could mean death, no one expected the most shocking scandal in centuries to begin with something as simple as spittle hitting silk. When Lady Cordelia Ashworth dared to spit at Queen Isabella during the most important ceremony of the year, she set in motion a chain of events that would expose hidden truths, shatter ancient alliances, and reveal that sometimes the greatest acts of rebellion come from the most unexpected places. What appeared to be an inexcusable breach of royal protocol would soon unveil a conspiracy that reached the very heart of the throne itself. The morning sun cast golden rays through the towering windows of Valdonia Palace's Great Hall, illuminating the hundreds of nobles who had gathered for the annual Feast of Allegiance. Lady Cordelia Ashworth stood among the crowd, her emerald silk gown rustling softly as she shifted nervously from foot to foot. At 26, she possessed a striking beauty that had caught many eyes at court, but today her elegant features were marred by barely concealed anxiety. Queen Isabella Ravencrest sat upon her throne of carved obsidian, her regal bearing commanding absolute attention. At 42, the Queen had ruled Valdonia for 15 years with an iron fist wrapped in velvet gloves. Her midnight black hair was adorned with the crown of stars, and her violet eyes surveyed her subjects with the calculating gaze of a master chess player. Beside her stood her trusted advisor, Lord Chancellor Edmund Blackthorne, a man whose silver beard and penetrating gray eyes had witnessed decades of court intrigue. The ceremony proceeded with its usual pomp and circumstance. One by one, the noble houses approached the throne to renew their oaths of loyalty to the crown. Each lord and lady knelt before Queen Isabella, spoke the ancient words of fealty, and kissed the royal ring. It was a tradition that had continued unbroken for 3 centuries, a sacred bond between ruler and ruled. When Lady Cordelia's turn came, something extraordinary happened. Instead of kneeling gracefully as protocol demanded, she remained standing. The hall fell silent, hundreds of eyes turning toward this unprecedented breach of etiquette. Queen Isabella's violet gaze fixed upon Cordelia with surprise that quickly transformed into cold fury. Lady Ashworth, the Queen's voice rang out, clear and commanding. You forget yourself. Kneel before your sovereign. Cordelia's hands trembled, but her voice remained steady. Your Majesty, I cannot in good conscience pledge loyalty to a crown built upon lies and murder. The gasps that echoed through the hall were audible even in the furthest corners. Lord Blackthorne stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively to his sword hilt. Several royal guards straightened, their armor clanking ominously in the sudden silence. Queen Isabella rose slowly from her throne, her movements deliberate and threatening. You dare speak such words in our presence? You commit treason with your very breath. I speak only truth, your Majesty, Cordelia replied, though her voice wavered slightly. My father, Lord Marcus Ashworth, did not die of fever as the court was told. He was poisoned because he discovered something that threatened your rule. The Queen's face remained composed, but those who knew her well could see the dangerous glitter in her eyes. Your grief has clearly driven you to madness, Lady Ashworth. We suggest you seek the counsel of the palace physicians. It was then that Cordelia committed the act that would be remembered for generations. Drawing herself up to her full height, she looked directly into the Queen's eyes and spat. The saliva struck the Queen's cheek, a shocking violation that seemed to freeze time itself. For a moment that stretched into eternity, no one moved. Then Captain Marcus Steele, the head of the Royal Guard, burst into action. A man of imposing stature with steel-gray hair and scars that spoke of countless battles. He had served the crown faithfully for 20 years. His loyalty was absolute, and what he had just witnessed was nothing short of assault upon the royal person. Seize her, Captain Steele bellowed, his voice booming through the hall like thunder. 6 guards moved with military precision, surrounding Cordelia before she could react. Their polished armor gleamed as they formed a circle around her, their hands resting on their sword hilts. Queen Isabella wiped her cheek with a silk handkerchief, her movements slow and deliberate. When she spoke, her voice was deadly quiet. "Lady Cordelia Ashworth, you have committed high treason against the crown of Valdonia. You have assaulted the royal person in full view of the court. By the ancient laws of our realm, the penalty for such crimes is death." Cordelia's face went pale, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "Then, let me die knowing I spoke the truth. My father discovered your secret, didn't he? He learned about the missing gold from the royal treasury, the forged documents, the innocent blood on your hands." The queen's composure cracked for just an instant, a flicker of something that might have been fear passing across her features. But she recovered quickly, her mask of royal authority sliding back into place. "Captain Steele," she commanded, "escort this traitor to the dungeons. She will await trial for her crimes." As the guards moved to carry out their queen's orders, Cordelia continued to speak, her voice rising to carry throughout the hall. "The people deserve to know the truth. They deserve to know that their beloved Queen Isabella is nothing more than a—" Her words were cut short as Captain Steele himself stepped forward and placed a firm hand over her mouth. "Enough," he said quietly but firmly. "You have said quite enough, my lady." The captain's actions were swift and professional. He bound Cordelia's hands with silk cords, a small mercy that acknowledged her noble birth even in disgrace. As she was led away, her green eyes blazed with undiminished fire, sweeping over the assembled nobles as if memorizing their faces. The court watched in stunned silence as Lady Cordelia was marched from the great hall. Her footsteps echoed against the marble floors, each sound seeming to hammer home the gravity of what had just transpired. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd like water through a broken dam, but they were quickly silenced by a single look from Queen Isabella. "Let this serve as a reminder to all," the Queen announced, her voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. "Treason against the crown will not be tolerated, regardless of one's birth or station. The laws of Valdonia are clear, and justice will be served." But even as she spoke these words with unwavering authority, Queen Isabella's mind was racing. Cordelia's accusations had been too specific, too detailed to be the ravings of a grief-stricken woman. Somewhere in the depths of the palace, dangerous secrets were stirring, and the queen knew that this incident was merely the beginning of a much larger storm. Lord Chancellor Blackthorne approached the throne, his expression carefully neutral. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should adjourn the ceremony. The court has witnessed quite enough excitement for one day." Queen Isabella nodded curtly. "Indeed, let it be known that the Feast of Allegiance will resume tomorrow, and we expect all noble houses to attend with proper respect and decorum." As the nobles began to file out of the great hall, their voices buzzed with speculation and shock. Queen Isabella remained seated upon her throne, her violet eyes staring at the spot where Cordelia had stood. The young woman's words echoed in her mind like an unwelcome prophecy, and she found herself wondering what other secrets might soon come to light. In the dungeons far below, Cordelia was placed in a cell that, while grim, was relatively comfortable by dungeon standards. Captain Steele himself oversaw her imprisonment, ensuring that she was treated with the respect due her noble birth despite her crimes. As the iron bars clanged shut, Cordelia looked up at the captain with eyes that held no trace of regret. "You know I'm telling the truth, don't you, Captain?" she said quietly. "You've served this kingdom long enough to recognize corruption when you see it." Captain Steele's weathered face remained impassive, but something in his steel-gray eyes suggested that her words had found their mark. Without responding, he turned and walked away, his heavy footsteps fading into the darkness of the dungeon corridors. Alone in her cell, Cordelia Ashworth sat down on the narrow cot and gazed up at the small barred window that provided her only view of the outside world. She had known that speaking the truth would likely cost her life, but she had also known that remaining silent would cost her soul. Her father's memory deserved justice, and if her sacrifice could bring that about, then she would face whatever consequences awaited her with courage. Above in the palace, the wheels of intrigue were already beginning to turn. News of the incident spread through the corridors like wildfire, carried by servants, whispered in alcoves, and discussed behind closed doors. Some viewed Cordelia as a madwoman driven to desperation by grief. Others began to wonder if there might be truth to her shocking accusations. In either case, the carefully maintained facade of royal perfection had been cracked, and through that crack, dangerous questions were beginning to emerge. The news of Lady Cordelia's shocking assault on Queen Isabella spread through the kingdom like wildfire across dry grassland. Within hours, every tavern, marketplace, and noble estate was buzzing with whispered conversations about the unprecedented incident. In the bustling capital city of Valdres, merchants paused in their negotiations to discuss the scandal, while servants in great houses found themselves the center of attention as they shared second-hand accounts of the dramatic confrontation. At Ravenshollow Manor, the ancestral home of the Blackthorne family, Lord Chancellor Edmund Blackthorne sat in his private study, surrounded by towering shelves of leather-bound books and ancient scrolls. The room was dimly lit by candlelight, casting dancing shadows across his weathered features as he contemplated the implications of the morning's events. His silver beard caught the flickering light as he stroked it thoughtfully, a habit he had developed over decades of political maneuvering. A soft knock on the door interrupted his brooding. "Enter," he called, and his personal secretary, a thin man named Aldrich, stepped into the study with obvious nervousness. "My lord," Aldrich began hesitantly, "there have been several visitors this evening, all asking about Lady Ashworth's accusations. Lord Harrison of Westmere, Lady Catherine of Thornfield, and Duke William of Northgate have all requested private audiences." Blackthorne's gray eyes narrowed. These were not casual social calls. Harrison, Catherine, and William were among the most influential nobles in the kingdom, and their sudden interest in meeting with him could only mean one thing. They were testing the waters, trying to determine where loyalties would lie if Cordelia's accusations proved to have merit. "Schedule meetings with each of them," Blackthorne instructed carefully, "but separately, and not until tomorrow evening. I want time to assess the full scope of this situation before we begin discussions." As Aldrich departed to make the necessary arrangements, Blackthorne turned his attention to a locked drawer in his massive oak desk. From it, he withdrew a collection of documents that he had hoped never to use. These papers contained information that could shake the very foundations of the kingdom, secrets that had been carefully buried for years. The irony was not lost on him that a young woman's desperate act of defiance might force him to reveal truths he had spent considerable effort to conceal. Meanwhile, in the palace dungeons, Cordelia found herself with an unexpected visitor. Captain Marcus Steele stood outside her cell, his imposing figure backlit by the flickering torches that lined the corridor. His steel-gray hair was disheveled, and his usually immaculate uniform showed signs of the stress he had endured throughout the day. "Lady Ashworth," he said quietly, glancing around to ensure they were not overheard, "I have come to discuss your situation." Cordelia rose from her cot and approached the bars, her emerald eyes studying the captain's face intently. "Have you come to offer me last rites, Captain? Or perhaps to extract a confession that might spare me the executioner's block?" "Neither," Steele replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have come because your words this morning have troubled me greatly. Your accusations were specific, too specific to be the product of grief-induced fantasy." The admission hung in the air between them like a dangerous confession. Cordelia felt her heart begin to race as she recognized the significance of what the captain was saying. Here was a man who had served the crown faithfully for 20 years, whose loyalty was considered absolute, and yet he was admitting to doubts about his queen. "My father kept detailed records," Cordelia said carefully, testing the waters. "Before his death, he shared some of his concerns with me. He had discovered irregularities in the royal treasury, payments made to individuals who officially did not exist, and orders signed with the Queen's seal that contradicted her public proclamations." Captain Steele's weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes betrayed his interest. Such records would be considered treasonous if they existed. The mere possession of them would be grounds for execution. They exist, Cordelia confirmed, her voice steady despite the danger of her admission. Hidden where no casual search would find them. My father was many things, but he was not careless with evidence that could cost him his life. The captain was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with conflicting loyalties. Finally, he spoke again, his words measured and careful. If such evidence were to come to light during your trial, it would create a situation that could endanger the stability of the entire kingdom. Wars have been fought over less. Cordelia gripped the cold, iron bars of her cell. The stability you speak of is built upon a foundation of lies and blood, Captain. How long can such a structure stand before it collapses under its own corruption? Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Captain Steele immediately stepped back from the cell, his professional demeanor sliding back into place like a well-worn mask. A younger guard appeared at the end of the corridor, his armor clanking with each step. "Captain," the guard called out, "Her Majesty requests your immediate presence in the throne room." Steele nodded curtly. "I will be there directly." As the younger guard departed, the captain turned back to Cordelia one final time. "Lady Ashworth, I suggest you consider your options very carefully. The trial is set for tomorrow afternoon, and the evidence against you is overwhelming." But his eyes conveyed a different message entirely, one that spoke of possibilities and dangerous choices that lay ahead. In the throne room, Queen Isabella paced behind her obsidian chair like a caged predator. Her midnight black hair was no longer perfectly arranged, and her violet eyes blazed with a mixture of fury and barely concealed anxiety. Lord Chancellor Blackthorne stood nearby, his expression carefully neutral as he watched his queen struggle with the implications of the day's events. "She knows," Isabella said suddenly, her voice sharp with tension. "Somehow, that little fool knows about things she should have no knowledge of. Her father was supposed to have died before he could share his discoveries with anyone." Blackthorne cleared his throat delicately. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should discuss the most prudent course of action. Lady Ashworth's public execution could serve as a warning to others who might consider similar acts of defiance. Or it could turn her into a martyr," the Queen countered, whirling to face him. "Dead martyrs have a way of becoming more dangerous than living troublemakers. Their words carry weight that they never possessed in life." The arrival of Captain Steele interrupted their discussion. The captain entered with his usual military bearing, though those who knew him well might have noticed the tension in his shoulders and the slight hesitation in his step. "Your Majesty," he said, offering a respectful bow. "You summoned me." Queen Isabella studied his face intently, as if trying to read thoughts he had not yet spoken. "Captain, I want you to arrange for additional security around the palace. The events of today may have emboldened other potential traitors, and we cannot afford any further disruptions." "Of course, Your Majesty," Steele replied. "I will triple the guard rotations and implement additional patrols throughout the palace grounds." "Good." The Queen's violet eyes never left his face. "I also want you to personally oversee Lady Ashworth's confinement. She is not to have any visitors without my express permission, and any conversations she has with the guards are to be reported to me immediately." Captain Steele felt the weight of the Queen's suspicion, but his expression remained unchanged. "As you command, Your Majesty. The prisoner will remain secure until her trial." As the captain departed to carry out his orders, Queen Isabella turned back to Lord Chancellor Blackthorne. "Edmund, I want you to expedite the trial proceedings. The sooner this matter is resolved, the sooner we can restore order to the court." Blackthorne nodded slowly, though his expression suggested he harbored reservations about the wisdom of such haste. "Your Majesty, might I suggest that we allow sufficient time for a thorough investigation? If there are indeed other conspirators involved, rushing to judgment could allow them to escape justice." The Queen's laugh was cold and bitter. "Justice? The only justice required here is the swift execution of a traitor who dared to assault the crown. Everything else is secondary." But Even as she spoke these words with apparent conviction, Queen Isabella knew that the situation was far more complex than she was willing to admit. Somewhere in the shadows of her kingdom, dangerous truths were stirring, and she could feel the careful web of deception she had woven over the years beginning to tremble under the weight of exposure. In the corridors of power, whispered conversations continued deep into the night. Nobles who had witnessed the morning's dramatic confrontation gathered in small groups, their voices low but their speculation intense. Some defended their queen with unwavering loyalty, dismissing Cordelia's accusations as the desperate lies of a madwoman. Others found themselves questioning assumptions they had never before thought to examine. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and in the fertile ground of court intrigue, such seeds had a way of growing into mighty trees that could overshadow even the strongest throne. The trial of Lady Cordelia Ashworth was set to take place in the Palace Hall of Justice, a grand chamber with soaring stone arches and stained glass windows that depicted scenes of historical legal proceedings. As dawn broke over Valdonia, crowds began gathering outside the palace gates, drawn by curiosity and the promise of witnessing what many believed would be the most sensational trial in recent memory. Inside the palace, Queen Isabella stood before her private mirror, adjusting the ceremonial robes she wore for formal court proceedings. The deep purple fabric was embroidered with golden thread that caught the morning light, and the crown of stars rested upon her carefully arranged black hair. But, despite her regal appearance, dark circles under her violet eyes betrayed a sleepless night spent wrestling with concerns that grew more pressing with each passing hour. A gentle knock on her chamber door announced the arrival of her personal maid, Elena, a woman in her 50s who had served the royal household for over 2 decades. Elena's weathered hands trembled slightly as she approached with the queen's jewelry box, a sign of a nervousness that had infected the entire palace staff since yesterday's dramatic events. "Your Majesty," Elena said softly, "Lord Chancellor Blackthorne awaits your pleasure in the antechamber. He wishes to discuss the final preparations for the trial." Queen Isabella nodded curtly, though she felt a familiar tightness in her chest at the mention of her longtime advisor. Blackthorne had seemed different since yesterday, more distant and calculating than usual. She wondered if he, like others in the court, was beginning to harbor doubts about her version of events. "Send him in," she commanded, and within moments, the silver-bearded Lord Chancellor entered her chambers with his characteristic measured stride. "Your Majesty," Blackthorne began, offering a respectful bow, "I have reviewed the proceedings for today's trial, and I must express certain concerns about the haste with which we are proceeding." The Queen's eyes flashed with irritation. "We discussed this yesterday, Edmund. Swift justice serves the Crown's interest better than prolonged deliberation." "Perhaps," Blackthorne replied carefully, "but I have received disturbing reports throughout the night. Several prominent nobles have been asking pointed questions about Lady Ashworth's accusations. Lord Harrison, in particular, has been making inquiries about the royal treasury's recent expenditures." Queen Isabella felt a chill run down her spine at the mention of treasury inquiries, but she maintained her composed exterior. Lord Harrison's curiosity about financial matters is hardly surprising, given his position as head of the Merchants Guild. "I fail to see how this relates to the trial of a woman who committed treason in front of hundreds of witnesses." "Your Majesty," Blackthorne continued, his voice taking on a more urgent tone, "what if Lady Ashworth attempts to present evidence during her trial? What if she has documents or testimony that could support her accusations?" The question hung in the air like a sword suspended over the Queen's head. She had spent considerable effort ensuring that Marcus Ashworth's investigation into her activities had died with him, but the possibility that he had shared his discoveries with his daughter was a nightmare she had tried not to contemplate. "Then, we ensure that no such evidence is permitted," the Queen replied coldly. "As sovereign, I have the authority to limit the scope of testimony in cases of treason. Any attempts by Lady Ashworth to introduce irrelevant materials will be summarily rejected." Meanwhile, in the palace dungeons, Cordelia prepared for what she believed might be her final day of life. She had slept little during the night, her mind racing with thoughts of her father and the dangerous game she had chosen to play. Captain Steele had visited her cell twice during the night, ostensibly to check on her security, but she had noticed that he seemed to be struggling with internal conflicts. As the morning light filtered through the small barred window of her cell, Cordelia heard the sound of multiple footsteps approaching. Captain Steele appeared, accompanied by 4 guards in ceremonial armor, their polished metal gleaming in the torchlight. "Lady Ashworth," the captain announced formally, "it is time for you to be escorted to the Hall of Justice. Your trial will begin within the hour." Cordelia rose from her cot with as much dignity as she could muster. Her emerald gown was wrinkled from her night in the dungeon, and her once perfect hair hung loosely around her shoulders, but her green eyes burned with undiminished fire. "Captain Steele," she said quietly as the guards moved to escort her from the cell, "I want you to know that whatever happens today, I bear no ill will toward you or your men. You are honorable soldiers following your queen's orders." The captain's weathered face remained impassive, but something in his steel-gray eyes suggested that her words had affected him more deeply than he cared to admit. As they began the long walk from the dungeons to the Hall of Justice, Cordelia could hear the murmur of crowds gathering outside the palace walls, drawn by the promise of witnessing justice being served. The Hall of Justice was packed to capacity when they arrived. Hundreds of nobles, court officials, and selected citizens filled every available seat, while guards lined the walls to ensure order was maintained. The chamber buzzed with nervous energy as conversations died to whispers, and all eyes turned toward the prisoner's dock, where Cordelia would stand trial. Queen Isabella entered through the sovereign's private entrance, her purple robes flowing behind her like liquid shadows. She took her place upon the elevated throne that dominated the far end of the hall, while Lord Chancellor Blackthorne assumed his position at the judicial bench. The symbolism was clear. This was royal justice, administered by the crown for the crown's protection. "Bring forth the prisoner," Blackthorne announced, his voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. Cordelia was led to the dock, her chin held high despite the gravity of her situation. She could feel hundreds of eyes upon her, studying her face for signs of madness, guilt, or defiance. She chose to look directly at Queen Isabella, meeting the monarch's violet gaze with steady determination. "Lady Cordelia Ashworth," Blackthorne continued, reading from an ornate scroll, "you stand accused of high treason against the crown of Aldonia, assault upon the royal person, and disturbing the peace of the realm. How do you answer these charges?" The moment of truth had arrived. Cordelia took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would determine not only her fate, but potentially the future of the kingdom itself. "My Lord Chancellor," she replied, her voice clear and carrying throughout the hall, "I answer that I am guilty of speaking truth in the face of power, and if that constitutes treason in your court, then I am proud to be counted a traitor." Gasps echoed through the chamber at her bold admission, though many had expected such defiance from the woman who had dared to spit upon her queen. Queen Isabella's hands tightened on the armrests of her throne, while several nobles leaned forward in their seats, eager to hear what revelations might follow. "Furthermore," Cordelia continued, her voice growing stronger, "I call upon this court to examine the evidence of corruption and murder that my father, Lord Marcus Ashworth, died attempting to expose. I call upon you to investigate the disappearance of gold from the royal treasury, the forging of official documents, and the systematic elimination of those who threatened to reveal these crimes." Lord Chancellor Blackthorne looked toward Queen Isabella, clearly seeking guidance on how to proceed. The Queen's expression remained composed, but those who knew her well could see the dangerous tension building behind her royal mask. "Lady Ashworth," Blackthorne said carefully, "these are serious accusations that require substantiation. Do you have evidence to support these claims?" Cordelia's heart raced as she reached the crucial moment of her gambit. "I do, my lord. My father kept detailed records of his investigation, including copies of altered documents, lists of suspicious payments, and correspondence that reveals the true scope of the conspiracy. These materials are hidden in a location known only to myself, and I am prepared to reveal their whereabouts in exchange for a full and impartial investigation. The hall erupted in excited murmurs as nobles turned to their neighbors, discussing the implications of Cordelia's dramatic offer. Queen Isabella rose from her throne, her violet eyes blazing with barely contained fury. "Enough," she commanded, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "This court will not be turned into a platform for wild accusations and unfounded conspiracy theories. The evidence against Lady Ashworth is clear and overwhelming. She assaulted the crown in full view of hundreds of witnesses, and that crime alone merits the ultimate punishment." But Captain Steele, standing near the prisoner's dock, found himself speaking before he could reconsider the wisdom of his words. "Your Majesty, if the accused claims to possess evidence relevant to matters of state security, should not such evidence be examined before sentence is passed?" The question sent a shock through the assembled crowd, and Queen Isabella's gaze fixed upon her longtime captain with undisguised astonishment. For a man known for his absolute loyalty to suddenly question royal judgment was unprecedented, and it sent ripples of speculation through the hall. "Captain Steele," the Queen said slowly, her voice dangerously quiet, "are you presuming to instruct your sovereign on matters of law and justice?" The weathered captain straightened to his full impressive height, his steel-gray eyes meeting the Queen's violet gaze without flinching. "Your Majesty, I serve the crown and the kingdom with equal devotion. If there is evidence that could affect the security of the realm, my oath requires me to see that it is properly investigated." The confrontation between Queen and Captain created an electric tension in the hall. Here was a man whose loyalty had never been questioned, whose service record was without blemish, publicly challenging the Queen's handling of the trial. The implications were staggering, and every person present understood that they were witnessing a moment that could reshape the kingdom's future. The confrontation between Queen Isabella and Captain Steele created a moment of stunned silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity. The packed Hall of Justice held its collective breath as two pillars of the realm found themselves on opposing sides of a question that could determine the kingdom's future. The tension was so thick that even the flickering torches seemed to burn with unusual intensity, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the mesmerized spectators. Queen Isabella's violet eyes blazed with a fury that threatened to consume everything in its path. But she also recognized the precarious position she now occupied. Captain Steele's public questioning of her judgment had transformed what should have been a simple treason trial into something far more dangerous. If she appeared too eager to suppress Cordelia's evidence, it might lend credibility to the very accusation she was trying to silence. "Very well," the Queen announced, her voice carrying a deceptive calm that fooled no one who truly knew her. "In the interest of demonstrating the Crown's commitment to justice, we will examine whatever evidence Lady Ashworth claims to possess. However," she continued, her tone growing sharper, "any attempt to waste this court's time with fabricated documents or spurious claims will result in additional charges being brought against the accused." Lord Chancellor Blackthorne cleared his throat nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the unexpected turn of events. "Lady Ashworth, you have stated that you possess evidence to support your accusations. Where are these documents located, and how do you propose that this court should verify their authenticity?" Cordelia felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she realized that her desperate gambit had succeeded beyond her wildest hopes. She had expected to be silenced immediately, but Captain Steele's unexpected intervention had forced the Queen's hand. Now she had to deliver on her promises, and the stakes could not have been higher. "My Lord Chancellor," she replied, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil, "the documents are hidden beneath the floorboards of my father's private study at Ashworth Manor. They're contained within a sealed metal box that bears his personal seal. The box can be found 3 paces from the eastern wall, directly beneath the portrait of my late grandfather." The specificity of her instructions sent another wave of murmurs through the assembled crowd. These were not the vague claims of a desperate woman, but precise directions that could be easily verified or disproven. Queen Isabella's hands gripped the armrests of her throne so tightly that her knuckles showed white through her pale skin. "Captain Steele," Lord Chancellor Blackthorne announced, "you will personally lead a detachment to Ashworth Manor to retrieve these alleged documents. Lord Harrison and Lady Catherine will accompany you as independent witnesses to ensure that nothing is tampered with during the investigation." The selection of Lord Harrison and Lady Catherine as witnesses was particularly significant. Both were influential nobles whose reputations for honesty were beyond reproach, and their presence would prevent either side from claiming that evidence had been planted or altered. Queen Isabella wanted to object to this arrangement, but she recognized that doing so would only fuel further suspicions about her motives. As preparations were made for the expedition to Ashworth Manor, the trial was suspended until the alleged evidence could be examined. The crowd in the Hall of Justice was dismissed, though many lingered in the corridors and courtyards of the palace, reluctant to miss any developments in what had become the most dramatic legal proceeding in living memory. Cordelia was escorted back to her cell, but the atmosphere had changed dramatically since the morning. The guards who accompanied her no longer looked at her with the contempt reserved for common traitors, but with the cautious respect accorded to someone who might possess dangerous knowledge. Even the dungeon itself seemed different, as if the very stones were holding their breath in anticipation of what might be revealed. Captain Steele's journey to Ashworth Manor took the better part of the afternoon, during which time the palace buzzed with speculation and rumor. Servants whispered in alcoves, nobles gathered in small groups to discuss possibilities, and even the most loyal courtiers began to wonder what secrets might be hidden in the darkness of the kingdom's recent past. The manor itself stood silent and imposing against the gray sky, its windows dark and unwelcoming. Lord Marcus Ashworth had been dead for 6 months, and his estate had remained largely untouched since his funeral. As Captain Steele led his small party into the abandoned study, dust motes danced in the pale afternoon light that filtered through tall windows. Lord Harrison, a distinguished man with silver hair and keen blue eyes, watched carefully as the captain began counting paces from the eastern wall. Lady Catherine, an elegant woman known for her sharp intelligence and uncompromising honesty, positioned herself where she could observe every detail of the search. When Captain Steele reached the specified location beneath the portrait of Cordelia's grandfather, he knelt and began examining the floorboards. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but closer inspection revealed that several boards had been recently disturbed. Using a prying tool borrowed from the manor's maintenance shed, the captain carefully lifted the boards to reveal a hollow space beneath. Inside the hiding place was a metal box exactly as Cordelia had described, bearing the distinctive seal of House Ashworth. Lord Harrison and Lady Catherine both examined the box and its seal, confirming that it appeared to be genuine and had not been recently tampered with. The journey back to the palace was conducted in tense silence, each member of the party acutely aware that they might be carrying evidence that could topple a queen. The metal box remained sealed throughout the return journey, to be opened only in the presence of the full court and under circumstances that would prevent any accusations of tampering. As evening fell over Valdonia, the Hall of Justice was once again packed to capacity. Word had spread throughout the capital that potentially explosive evidence was about to be revealed, and even those who had no official reason to attend had found ways to gain access to the proceedings. Queen Isabella had spent the intervening hours in her private chambers, pacing like a caged animal as she wrestled with growing anxiety about what the box might contain. Lord Chancellor Blackthorne had attempted to counsel her about various legal strategies, but she had been too agitated to focus on his advice. When Captain Steele entered the hall carrying the sealed box, a hush fell over the assembled crowd. The captain's weathered face was grim as he approached the judicial bench, clearly understanding the significance of what he was about to reveal. "My Lord Chancellor," he announced formally, We have retrieved the box from the location specified by Lady Ashworth. It bears the authentic seal of Lord Marcus Ashworth and shows no signs of recent tampering. Lord Chancellor Blackthorne accepted the box with trembling hands, acutely aware that hundreds of eyes were watching his every movement. Queen Isabella leaned forward on her throne, her violet eyes fixed upon the metal container that might hold the keys to her destruction. "The seal will now be broken in the presence of the court," Blackthorne announced, his voice echoing through the silent hall. The crack of breaking wax seemed unnaturally loud in the hushed chamber, and as the lid of the box was lifted, everyone present strained to see what secrets it might contain. Inside were numerous documents, some bearing official seals, others written in Lord Marcus Ashworth's distinctive handwriting. Blackthorne lifted the first document, a letter addressed to Cordelia herself. With the court's permission, he began to read aloud, "My dearest daughter, if you are reading this letter, then my worst fears have been realized, and those I sought to expose have silenced me permanently. The documents contained within this box represent months of careful investigation into activities that threaten the very foundation of our kingdom. I have discovered evidence of systematic theft from the royal treasury, falsification of official documents, and the murder of at least 3 individuals who stumbled upon aspects of this conspiracy." The reading of this opening passage sent shock waves through the assembled crowd, and Queen Isabella's face went deadly pale. But this was only the beginning, as document after document was examined, and their contents revealed to the horrified court. There were copies of treasury records showing massive discrepancies between reported and actual gold reserves. There were forged royal seals used to authorize payments to mysterious individuals whose names appeared nowhere in official court records. Most damning of all, there were letters written in a hand that several witnesses recognized as belonging to Queen Isabella herself, ordering the elimination of those who had grown too curious about her activities. As each piece of evidence was presented, the case against the Queen grew stronger and more undeniable. The woman who had ruled Valdonia with an iron fist for 15 years stood revealed as a common criminal who had used her position to line her own pockets and eliminate anyone who threatened to expose her crimes. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come, hidden in a sealed envelope at the bottom of the box. The sealed envelope at the bottom of Marcus Ashworth's metal box bore an inscription that made Lord Chancellor Blackthorne's hands tremble as he lifted it. "To be opened only if my investigation cost me my life. Final testament of Lord Marcus Ashworth." The weight of those words seemed to press down upon the entire Hall of Justice as hundreds of spectators leaned forward, sensing that they were about to witness the climax of a drama that would reshape their understanding of the kingdom they thought they knew. Queen Isabella sat motionless upon her throne, her violet eyes fixed upon the envelope with the intensity of a predator watching its prey. But there was something different in her gaze now, something that suggested she knew exactly what that final document contained and why it had been her greatest fear for the past 6 months. "The final testament of Lord Marcus Ashworth will now be read before this court," Lord Chancellor Blackthorne announced, though his voice cracked slightly as he spoke the formal words. With careful movements, he broke the wax seal and unfolded the parchment within. "To my beloved daughter Cordelia, and to the people of Valdonia," he began, reading in a voice that carried clearly through the silent chamber, "I write these words knowing that they may be my last. My investigation into the financial irregularities within the royal treasury has uncovered a conspiracy that reaches far beyond simple theft or corruption. What I have discovered is nothing less than regicide and usurpation of the crown itself." The gasps that echoed through the hall were audible even in the furthest corners, and several nobles rose from their seats in shock before remembering themselves and sitting back down. Queen Isabella's face had gone as white as fresh snow, but her expression remained defiant, as if she were preparing to fight to her last breath. Blackthorne continued reading, his voice growing stronger as the full magnitude of the revelations became clear. The woman who sits upon the throne of Valdonia is not Queen Isabella Ravencrest, rightful heir to the crown. The true Queen Isabella died of poison 15 years ago, on the very night she was to be crowned. The woman who has ruled in her place is Lady Margaret Ashford, the Queen's former companion and closest friend, who used her intimate knowledge of the Queen's habits and mannerisms to assume her identity. The Hall of Justice erupted in chaos as the implications of this stunning revelation sank in. Nobles shouted questions and accusations while guards moved to maintain order, but the woman on the throne remained perfectly still, as if she had been carved from ice. The secret she had protected with murder and deception for 15 years had finally been exposed, and there was no escape from the judgment that would follow. "Order!" Lord Chancellor Blackthorne shouted, his voice rising above the tumult. "Order in the court." Gradually, the noise subsided as people strained to hear the remainder of Marcus Ashworth's testament. "I have in my possession," the reading continued, "copies of correspondence between Lady Margaret Ashford and her co-conspirators, including detailed plans for the assassination of the true queen. I have evidence of the bribes paid to palace servants who assisted in the deception, and, most critically, I have testimony from Dr. Edmund Hawthorne, the royal physician who was forced at knife point to falsify the cause of Queen Isabella's death." Captain Steele, standing near the prisoner's dock where Cordelia watched with tears streaming down her face, felt the pieces of a puzzle he had never realized existed finally clicking into place. The subtle changes he had noticed in the Queen's behavior over the years, the way certain longtime servants had mysteriously disappeared, the gradual replacement of trusted advisors with new faces, all of it now made terrible sense. "The woman who calls herself Queen Isabella," Lord Chancellor Blackthorne read on, "has murdered not only the rightful sovereign, but at least 6 other individuals who discovered aspects of her deception. She has stolen hundreds of thousands of gold pieces from the royal treasury to fund her network of conspirators and assassins. Most heinously of all, she has corrupted the very concept of royal justice, using the law as a weapon to eliminate her enemies while protecting her criminal allies." As the reading neared its end, the false queen finally rose from her throne, her composure cracking for the first time since the trial had begun. "Enough!" she screamed, her voice shrill with desperation. "These are the fabrications of a madman, the desperate lies of traitors who seek to destroy the stability of the realm." But her protests fell on deaf ears as Lord Chancellor Blackthorne reached the final, most devastating paragraph of Marcus Ashworth's testament. "I have hidden proof of the true Queen's murder in a location that Margaret Ashford will never find, including a vial of the poison used to kill her, and a signed confession from one of the conspirators. This evidence is concealed within the royal tomb itself, behind the false wall I helped construct to hide the truth of what transpired on that dark night 15 years ago. The revelation that evidence of the true Queen's murder was hidden within the royal tomb sent another shock wave through the assembly. The sacred resting place of Aldonia's monarchs had been desecrated by the very woman who claimed to rule in their name, turned into a hiding place for the proof of her ultimate crime. Captain Steele stepped forward, his weathered face grim with the weight of duty that now fell upon his shoulders. "By the ancient laws of Valdonia," he announced in a voice that carried the authority of his 20 years of faithful service, "I place Margaret Ashford under arrest for high treason, regicide, theft of the crown, and conspiracy to commit murder." The woman who had ruled as Queen Isabella for 15 years finally abandoned all pretense of royal dignity. She turned toward the nearest exit, clearly intending to flee, but found her path blocked by royal guards whose loyalty to the true crown superseded their obedience to a usurper. "You fools," she snarled, her mask of noble bearing completely stripped away. "Do you think the kingdom can survive without strong leadership? Do you believe the truth will bring you peace and prosperity? I have held this realm together through wars and famines, through rebellions and invasions. Without me, Valdonia will crumble into chaos." Lord Chancellor Blackthorne, his silver beard trembling with emotion, looked upon the woman he had served unknowingly for so many years. "You speak of holding the kingdom together," he said quietly, "but you built your rule upon a foundation of lies and blood. True strength comes from justice and honor, not from deception and murder." Lady Cordelia, still standing in the prisoner's dock, watched as the guards moved to arrest the false queen. The vindication she had sought at the cost of her own life was finally at hand, but the victory felt hollow in the face of the tremendous upheaval that would follow. An entire generation had known no ruler but Margaret Ashford, and the revelation that their queen was an impostor would shake the kingdom to its very foundations. As the former queen was led away in chains, her violet eyes blazing with undiminished fury, Captain Steele approached Cordelia's position. "Lady Ashworth," he said formally, "by the authority vested in me as protector of the realm, I hereby declare all charges against you to be dropped. Your actions, while seemingly treasonous, were in fact the desperate attempts of a loyal subject to expose the greatest treason in our kingdom's history." The captain's words were met with thunderous applause from the assembled crowd, though many questions remained about what would happen next. With the rightful queen dead and no clear heir to claim the throne, Valdonia faced a constitutional crisis that would test the very foundations of its government. In the days that followed, the hidden chamber within the royal tomb was opened, revealing exactly the evidence that Marcus Ashworth had promised. The vial of poison, the forged documents, and the signed confessions painted a complete picture of the conspiracy that had robbed Valdonia of its rightful ruler 15 years earlier. Margaret Ashford, stripped of her stolen title and royal privileges, was tried for her crimes and sentenced to death. But even as she awaited execution, she maintained that her rule had been beneficial for the kingdom, that the truth she had hidden was less important than the stability she had provided. Lady Cordelia Ashworth became something of a folk hero, praised throughout the kingdom as the brave woman who had sacrificed everything to reveal the truth. But she took little satisfaction in her fame, knowing that her father had paid the ultimate price for his pursuit of justice, and that the kingdom now faced an uncertain future. Captain Marcus Steele was appointed as Lord Protector of the realm, charged with maintaining order while the noble houses debated the question of succession. His reputation for honor and his pivotal role in exposing the false queen made him the natural choice to guide the kingdom through its crisis. Lord Chancellor Blackthorne, devastated by his unwitting complicity in 15 years of deception, retired from public service and devoted his remaining years to documenting the true history of the reign of Margaret Ashford, ensuring that future generations would understand the importance of vigilance in protecting truth and justice. The story of the royal guard who threw the false queen in jail for daring to spit at the true memory of Queen Isabella became legend throughout Valdonia. A reminder that sometimes the most shocking acts of defiance are actually the greatest expressions of loyalty to the crown and kingdom. In the end, Cordelia's desperate gambit had not only saved her own life, but had restored the honor of a realm that had unknowingly lived under the rule of a usurper for 15 long years. The kingdom of Valdonia would eventually find its way to a new ruler and a new stability, but the events of that dramatic trial would be remembered forever as proof that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always find a way to emerge into the light.